All right, everyone, we're going to get started. So thanks for being here. I have the pleasure of introducing Marc Garcia, who is an assistant professor of sociology in the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. Prior to joining Syracuse, Dr. Garcia was an assistant professor at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln for 3 years. I've learned a tremendous amount from Marc's work, which, I see him as one of the leading scholars of the health of aging Latinos in the United States. And I think what his work brings is a renewed focus on the heterogeneity within that group. And his work has been published in a number of leading journals spanning demography, population health, and aging. And today we're going to be hearing about some of his newer work focusing on the political and policy determinants of Latino health and aging in the United States. So without further ado, Marc.
Courtney, thank you very much for that introduction. Okay, let's get started. The title of my presentation today is U.S. State Policy Context and Disability Risk Among Midlife and Older Latinos in the United States. To begin with, I want to thank everybody for the invitation coming here presenting this research, particularly during Hispanic Heritage Month. Just a little positionality statement. I'm Mexican American, born and raised in San Antonio. My family goes back multiple generations. As far as I'm aware, I don't have any family or know of any family outside the US. And during my graduate studies, both of my parents passed away. My mother at 63, my father at 71. During that period, I did a lot of caregiving, severe ADLs, bathing, toileting, transferring, feeding for the two. And also, prior to completing my PhD, I also worked for some time for the Department of Aging and Disability Services in Texas, which is under the Health and Human Service umbrella. And these experiences have largely shaped my research agenda. I'd quickly like to acknowledge some of my collaborators and some of the work I'm going to share today. Catherine Garcia, Blakely Kemp, Rogelio Science, and Mara Shefto. And before I begin, I just want to state, for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to use these terms you see on the screen, Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Latina, interchangeably. There's a big debate in academia about the use of these terms, particularly the two on this side. I'm not going to get into that. The reason I'm using these terms interchangeably is because much of the research, including my own, uses these different terms. So to give an overview, that's how I'm going to proceed. A very brief outline, I'm going to give an overview of the U.S. Latino population, some specific demographic characteristics, and talk a little bit about the within-group heterogeneity among the U.S. Latino population, and also challenges, right, studying aging among Latinos, specifically in regards to Latino heterogeneity. And then I'm going to present some preliminary results from P30 grant that I just got funded, looking at state context and state policy in regards to cognitive difficulties. This is a new area I'm moving in, and I'm very excited about this direction and to be sharing these findings with you. So let's begin with the demography of Latinos. If we turn on the news today, you would think that Latinos are relatively newcomers to the United States. Earlier this week, you saw over 9,000 undocumented entries in Eagle Pass, Texas. Again, if you look at the news, you see new streams of immigration from Central America and from South America. There's many states that are moving these immigrants from red states to blue states. However, if you look at this figure, you will see that there are certain groups of Latinos that have been here for a long period of time in the United States, right? They're not newcomers at all. And over the past 40 years, the Latino population has grown largely, right? In 1980, there was approximately 14.6 million Latinos. And in 2020, this number increased to over 62 million. However, Latinos are a relatively young group when we think about population age structure. As we could see here, approximately 31% of US Latinos are under the age of 18 compared to approximately 19% for the non-Hispanic white population. If we look at the other age of the other spectrum of the life force, we'll see that Latinos comprise nearly 8% of population 65 years and older compared to whites, which is 21%. And looking at these two populations, the median age is approximately 30 years for Latinos and 44 years for non-Latino whites. So there's approximately a 14-year difference in median age between these two populations. However, although the Latino population, US Latino population, is relatively young, this population is also aging like the rest of the country. And as we could see in the future, we're going to have a convergence of these two age groups. Now, this map illustrates the percentage change in the Latino population from 2000 to 2020. And as we could see, the population increase for Latinos has not been uniform across the states. More importantly, the states that have witnessed the larger increases, here in dark blue, for instance, you will see these are states that are non-traditional destinations. Right? These are largely new destination areas. If you look on top, the Dakotas, areas where Latinos traditionally did not migrate to. When we think about the older Latino population, again, it is also not uniformly distributed across the United States. In the red states, we see a larger proportion, particularly in Florida, New York, New Mexico, and interesting enough, Montana. But among traditional destination areas in the Midwest, Texas, Arizona, and California, we see these groups are aging also. And importantly, if we look at these yellow states right here, these new destination areas, they largely map upon this map right here, right? So these new destination areas, as shown here, these new destinations have a lower percentage of older Latino adults, which is very important. Now, thinking about the distribution of Latinos across states, for the past 40 years, the top 5 states have been relatively stable when we think about the Latino population, with the exception that we see here, New York and Florida flipping in 2010 and 2020. Interesting enough, the most recent data released by the census shows that the New York Latino population experienced a 0.7% population decline. And then next, if we look at the next block of states where Latinos live and reside, we could see Pennsylvania here between 11 and 13 across 1980 to 2020. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about within group heterogeneity among Latino adults. To begin with, Latinos are racially and culturally diverse. We know Latinos come from over 30 countries in Central America, South America, as well as the Caribbean. And groups of Latinos have distinct histories in the United States, right? Not all Latinos are the same. When we use these pan-ethnic labels and we talk about Latino groups, it's very important to distinguish about who we're talking to. In the United States, the Mexican origin population comprises over 60% of the population. Thus, when we use pan-ethnic labels and we don't look at data disaggregation, what we're seeing with pan-ethnic labels is largely the Mexican population, right? It's reflective of the Mexican population. Now, in the United States, population groups, Latino subgroups are also not distributed equally across the country. Here we could see to the left in the Southwest, largely Mexican origin population along the Mexican border. In Florida, large concentrations of Cubans, right? We know the proximity to Cuba. And then if we go up into the Northeast, we see different populations, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, and more recent arrivals of Central Americans. And then if we look at these populations also, these are Latino subgroups, the changes in population from 2000 to 2020, there has also been large increases, right? The population increases among subgroups also has not been uniform. As we could see on top, Venezuelans have the largest increase over the past 20 years. And then it goes down in the bottom, we see the Mexican origin population, Puerto Ricans, the larger groups where the population increase has been somewhat smaller. But importantly, we're witnessing more and more different streams of immigration from Central and South America that is contributing to the heterogeneity within the US Latino population. Now, I'd just like to acknowledge there's additional axes of stratification when we talk about the Latino population. Here are a few. Race, for instance, there's a significant number of Afro-Latinos residing in the United States, as well as indigenous population. If you look at the US Census, you will also see that there's been large increases in Latinos who identify as some other race, as well as variation by socioeconomic status, access to healthcare, and some of these other factors here. Now, when we think about Latinos, nativity status has been an important factor for Latino health. In 2022, approximately 32% of US Latinos were foreign born. Research has shown that the foreign population that comes to the United States has been health selected. That is, they're healthier than the US population here and healthier than the population from the country of origins who do not migrate. And this health selectivity has led to increased longevity and among foreign-born Latinos, which has been coined the Hispanic paradox, right? It's been coined the Hispanic paradox because Latinos, despite their low SES, low education, have comparable and many times better mortality and longevity than whites, which makes it a paradox. Within this literature, the healthy immigrant effect has been one of the things that has been put out there to explain these differences. That is, immigrants to the United States, again, are generally healthier, both than the US population and the population left behind. Within the foreign-born population, what I've tried to do along with my research, as well as others, is look at age of migration. Right? When we think about the foreign-born population, there's also a lot of heterogeneity beyond country of origin, but among the foreign-born population, when they migrated to the United States. And I use age of migration as a proxy for the type of migration, the degree of health selectivity, and also as a proxy for exposure to the new environment and their home environment. Here we have a paper put forth by Zoya Garcia, and I really like this, this figure here. It's very informative. Many times when we think about health selectivity, right, there's along with the healthy immigrant effect, there's this idea of negative acculturation. That is, the more time you spend in the United States, more time immigrants spend in the United States, the more likely they are to adopt negative health behaviors, such as smoking, poor eating, and what have you. However, when we think about age of migration categories, there has been selectivity among these groups. And generally what the literature finds is those who migrate in early life migrants, right? They are less health selected, right? And this is because when they migrate, they're not migrating on their own. Again, I'm talking about older adults, not what's happening right now, right? In the past 10, 15 years, we've seen a lot of migrants from Latin America coming by themselves. This population is 50 years and older, and many times when they migrated with family members. So it wasn't their health selectivity. Their selectivity represents that of their family members. When we look at middle-aged adults, 18 to 34, these are largely labor migrants, right? And the research shows that they're extremely selected, health selected, right? And when you think about it, it makes sense. Migrants, labor migrants, they have to be healthy enough to make the journey to the United States, many times a treacherous journey. And when they arrive in the United States, they have to be able to work in many physically taxing occupations, right? On the other end of the spectrum, we have here, these are those 35 to 49, and then also adults 50 years and older. Many times the reason for migration is different, particularly migrants 50 years and older. They're not migrating for work, they're migrating for family reunification purposes. So many times they already have family members in the United States, and through that process, they migrate to the United States, but they are in poor health. And thinking about nativity status and mortality overall for the Latino population, there has been a lot of research that has explored this, right? The Hispanic paradox documented this advantage by acculturation and duration and age of migration. And these findings have been robust. Latinos have a mortality and a longevity advantage relative to whites and other groups. However, when we talk about morbidity and disability, the findings have been mixed, right? There have been many studies that explored, well, does the Hispanic paradox extend to disability? And research has overwhelmingly shown that it doesn't, right? Latinos, while they enjoy lower mortality and longer lives, these lives are heavily burdened by disease, by morbidity, by disability, and cognitive impairment. Thus, they live longer lives, but not healthier lives, right? Many times when we think about the compression of morbidity, for example, ideally, we live healthy lives, we're sick for a short period, and we die, right? That's kind of the model there. However, with Latinos, they live long lives, and we could see that particularly the women, foreign-born Latino women, they have a heavy burden of, again, morbidity, disability, and that leads to a heavy burden, right? And poor quality of late life. So they're living longer, but they're not living healthier. Other researchers, particularly Elizabeth Arias, have tried to explore heterogeneity within these groups, right? Elizabeth Arias has a paper that was published a couple of years where she's looking at mortality differences within the Latino population by race, by country of origin, and by duration. If you're interested in mortality, I encourage you to read this paper. It's very, very informative. And then also by country of origin, Andrew Fenelon has showed significant differences by country of origin and nativity status, right? So again, Latinos, when we think about Latinos as a Penn ethnicity, we have to also be very cognizant that there's a lot of variation within this group. In my own research, I've tried to explore some of the heterogeneity within the morbidity and disability using the NHIS, National Health and Interview Survey, which is a very rich data set that allows you to explore different morbidities, diabetes, cardiovascular, and what have you, but also disability, ADLs, IADLs, and functional limitations. Okay, I want to talk about a little bit of the challenges examining Latino population health. And here I have a few data sets, nationally representative data sets with the exception of the SOL that are really good data sets to examine different axes of stratification, right? Looking at nativity status, looking at country of origin, and what have you. However, many of these, with the exception of the health and retirement study and the study on Latinos, these other studies are cross-sectional, they're not longitudinal. So when you're exploring heterogeneity among these groups, it becomes very, very difficult because of the lack of data. I'd like to note that there are regional data sets that have rich information and are also longitudinal, and they offer, right? With these data sets, you could explore a lot more of the within group heterogeneity and also ADLs, IADLs, disability, morbidity, cognition, very rich data set. But when you think about the United States and you think about looking at state context, many of these data sets aren't helpful for this particular line of research, given the small number of Latinos in the data sets and across states. Here is a study I published in 2018, looking at the heterogeneity among Latinos in the NHIS using data from 2000 to 2018. And if you look at the right panel, I have Latinos grouped in a pan-ethnic category. On the panel over here to the side, disaggregated by a few select groups. Well, just looking at these figures, you could see what you lose when you're just examining Latinos as a pan-ethnicity, right? Okay, well, you look at Latinos, they're disadvantaged, right? In the prevalence of self-reported cognitive impairment relative to non-Latino whites. But when you disaggregate this data, you could see large differences between these groups. And particularly among island-born Puerto Ricans, they're the most disadvantaged, right, within this population, where generally Cubans are the most advantaged among Latino groups. And these results largely follow SES patterns among these groups, right? Well, one thing that I've done here is a study with Catherine Garcia and Mata Sheffield, where we decided to use the ACS, the American Community Survey. We're using data from 2015 to 2019, and we know there's more groups than Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, and Cubans in the United States. So what we wanted to do was explore the heterogeneity among the top 10 groups, the top 10 Latino groups in the United States, in regards to cognitive difficulties. Now, I'm presenting just 5 groups, because 10 groups gets really, really busy. But one thing I want to show here, this is both for men and women. As I said in the previous study, I did not have the power to stratify and examine gender differences. But one thing that sticks out and follows the similar study is that Puerto Ricans in particular are disadvantaged relative to other groups. We could see that both men and women, and this also extends notably to other Caribbean groups, Dominicans and Cubans, right? They're the most disadvantaged in cognitive difficulties within this period. When we look at nativity status, we see island-born Puerto Rican men have, again, similar to the previous study, have the highest reported cognitive impairment among these Latino groups here. And it's similar for the US-born, although the foreign-born Puerto Ricans, the disparities are more pronounced. When we look at women, Puerto Rican women also report the highest cognitive impairment, regardless of nativity status. So if they were born in the US, if they were born in Puerto Rico, these patterns are consistent. And again, Dominicans and Cubans, the Caribbean Latinos, follow very, very similar patterns. One of the things I've also tried to do with this data, and I touched on this earlier with the age of migration framework, right? This is not longitudinal data, this is cross-sectional data, but using this life course perspective, I try to examine these processes, right? And as we could see, for instance, for US-born Mexican men and also Salvadoran men, those born in the US are disadvantaged relative to all of the foreign-born population, right? Does this have, okay. And then when we look at women, right, there's not as much differences. However, notably, for some groups, those who migrated at age 50 and older, we could see, particularly for the Caribbean groups, again, they're the most disadvantaged, right? I mean, the differences here don't look that big because the figures are a bit small, but consistently, Puerto Rican, Dominican, and Cuban women who migrated to the United States later in the life course are the more disadvantaged. And when we think about the incorporation right, of these groups. Many times, again, thinking about these processes, we talk about, well, negative acculturation. The longer time you spend in the United States, the more likely your health is going to decline. However, there's positive aspects of living in the United States. Again, if you migrate early in the life course, right, say for instance 4 or 5 years old, well, for all practical purposes, you're raised in the United States. You're educated in the United States. The younger you are when you migrate to the United States, the more opportunities you have to incorporate educationally and occupationally into mainstream organizations which are protective of health, right? For those who migrate at the other end of the life course, age 50, well, if you're 50 years old, you migrate to the United States, your education largely is completed, right? And then there's also, among these groups, we know there's problems integrating. You come to the United States at age 50, particularly a large city, there's language barriers, you're in a new environment, leads to depression and what have you, which is also associated with cognitive difficulties. So those studies, national studies on Latinos, have largely motivated my new project. Right? We know that there's variation among groups by nativity status, by country of origin, by gender, and what have you. So my goal with this is to explore variation across US states. The literature has shown, this is a study by my colleague Jennifer Caras Montes, that US states they do shape disability in the United States. This is ACS data also. And your own Courtney Bone has done similar work looking at Black-white differences across states. And these studies are what largely lead me to my own research, asking these questions. To what extent does cognitive difficulties vary across states among midlife and late life Latinos? And also, how does state variation and cognitive difficulties differ among Latino subgroups? For the results I'm about to present, I used the American Community Survey data from 2008 to 2019. And here's just my sample down here on the bottom. Okay, so to begin with, looking at this, as I've mentioned, Latinos are not equally, the population of Latinos is not equally distributed in the United States. Here, what we see is the population. These 26 states here represent 95% of the Latino population age 45 to 85. And that's what I'm going to use for my analysis moving forward. Looking at cognitive difficulties among Latinos in these states, we could also see there's wide variation. A better way to look at this with clearer numbers, we could see that Pennsylvania, where we are now, looking at cognitive difficulties among these populations, they have the highest prevalence, right, relative to other groups. This is nearly double of Maryland, or over double of Maryland and Virginia. But importantly, there's variation across all these groups here, right? All these states. And this is looking at Latinos again as a pan-ethnicity, right? I will come to that, yes, I'm sorry. So cognitive difficulties, looking at cognitive difficulties across states by age-specific groups, what I have here is the lowest percentage of cognitive difficulties are shown in blue, represented by Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, Utah, and Virginia. And then the 5 states representing the highest percentage of cognitive impairment are shown in orange, and that's Michigan, New Mexico, Oregon, and again, Pennsylvania. What I've done here is I'm presenting 4 states that equal over 65% of the Latino population, and also Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania represents about 1.4% of the Latino population in the United States. But with this particular figure, I'm looking at cognitive difficulties across these states by country of origin, the 5 largest country of origin groups here. And again, you could see variation, but even within group variation for Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, across states. Pennsylvania in particular sticks out with Puerto Ricans exhibiting a 17.8 prevalence of cognitive difficulties. Okay, I'm going to transition now to U.S. state policy context and disability risk among midlife Latino adults in the United States. And again, there's a wide literature already looking at the whole population. My colleague Jennifer Carras-Montes and her collaborators have been leading this effort, looking at the whole population in the United States, as well as Blakely Camp and Jennifer Carras-Montes here are they wrote the first study looking at racial differences, right? The other studies have largely looked at the whole US population. And here, what Blakely Camp did was looking at US state policy context and health among midlife adults. But importantly, what they've shown is that there are Black-white differences, right? When we look at these policy domains. So building on that, the aim of my next study was to assess how state policy domains predict cognitive difficulty among Pan-ethnic Latinos, again, age 45 to 85, and also assess how those domains are associated with cognitive health by nativity, gender, education, citizenship, and country of origin. I used the ACS data for this also. However, if you note, I'm using different years, 2001 to 2016. Here's my sample for this group. And again, these are the states in the analysis. These are 25 states, different time periods, smaller group, but they comprise 95% of the overall Latino population in the United States. And as you could see from this largely mirrors the previous table I showed about the top 20 states. But I just wanted to give everybody an idea of what states are included in the population sizes, right? Because whenever we talk about the Latino population and the distribution, or if you think about Wisconsin, you think about Oklahoma, Utah, these are not necessarily areas that Latinos come to mind, right? You know, particularly Utah and Oklahoma. Okay, so I merged ACS data with 9 state policy domains. This is Grumbach's data, which he collected from 1970 to 2014. The 9 domains that I include in my analyses are the domains that showed variation within these states across the time period. And when we think about these policy domains, I'd just like to give you an example. These domains are created with several policies in them. For instance, disability insurance, local minimum wage ban, local sick leave law ban, minimum wage, paid family leave, etc. Now, the policy domains range from 0 to 1 in a conservative to liberal continuum, and liberal policies are conceptualized as if they expand state power or economic regulation and redistribution, if they protect the rights of marginalized groups, and also if it restricts state power to punish deviant behavior. Again, these methods and these data have been widely published, looking at the larger US population. And to answer your question, this slide was, taking out the outcome measure. Cognitive difficulty is measured by difficulties learning, remembering, concentrating, or making decisions because of a physical, mental, or emotional condition.
Let me ask you a quick question about the state policy variables. You have data from 2000 to 2016, right, for the outcome. So when are the policy variables? What year are they?
From 2001 to 2014. Yep. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm sorry if I was not clear. Key demographic variables: nativity status, gender, country of origin for 3 groups: education and citizenship. And For these models, they're logistic regression models. The policy domains are lagged by 2 years. Again, ACS 2016, fixed effects for state and year. And then the analyses are stratified by nativity status, gender, and these other axes. So, very quickly, again, this is preliminary research. It's an area I'm moving into. And what I've decided to do is present odds ratios. And the results are expressed here as stated, odds ratios. The odds ratios estimate the odds of cognitive difficulty within a state if they had the most liberal score for the policy domain, divided by the odds for cognitive difficulty in the same state if they had the most conservative score for policy domain. Therefore, ORs less than 1 indicate that a more liberal configuration of a policy is associated with lower odds of cognitive difficulty, whereas odds ratios greater than 1 indicate that a more conservative configuration of policy domains is associated with lower odds. Okay, so first, this slide shows individual models for Pan-ethnic Latinos, foreign-born Latinos, and US-born Latinos across these 9 domains. And if we look at the top, starting with the privacy labor domain, we will see that liberal private labor policies are associated with 33% lower odds of reporting cognitive difficulty, right? Is that clear? And we see the same pattern for the foreign-born and the US-born. And then if you look through these, the only other thing that came out significant was the policy domain for LGBT. Looking at stratification by men and women, we see largely the same results. Private labor domains, right? More liberal private domains predict lower odds of cognitive difficulty. And we could see the same for immigration for men, although not for women. And then on the bottom again, both for men and women, LGBT conservative policies are significant regardless of gender. Looking at less than high school and those with high school education above, we see similar patterns again. For private labor, private labor domains are significant. This is going to be a recurring theme for cognitive difficulties among Latinos, regardless of axes of stratification. Immigration, also significant here for those with a high school or more, as well as tobacco tax. And then on the right side, we see conservative policy domains, criminal justice, and LGBT domains significant for those with less than high school. Looking at citizenship status, again, privacy labor domains are significant for both groups. Immigration for citizens, and also we still see for citizens significant conservative policies and within the LGBT policy domain. Among country of origin groups, similar results. With the exception of Puerto Ricans, privacy labor is significant for both Mexicans and Cubans in relation to cognitive difficulties. More liberal policies, again, showing a lower odds of cognitive difficulty. And that's largely it, what we see with the exception of criminal justice and LGBT for the Mexican population. So I'm just gonna briefly summarize here. Labor policies are important for cognitive health for all groups, with the exception of Puerto Ricans. Immigrant policies, liberal immigrant policies are important for the cognitive health of Latino men, those with a high school or higher education, citizens, Mexicans, and Cubans. Conservative policies for LGBT are important for the cognitive health of some groups, right? Not all. For US-born men, for men and women, the percentage should be a dash, excuse me, I apologize for that. Those with less than high school, and also citizens. So to conclude, there's significant variation in cognitive difficulties by state among midlife and older Latinos. State context and state policy are very important factors to consider when we think about cognitive difficulties and population health. And also, there are substantial within group differences among US Latinos across different axes of stratification, right? So it's very important to look at, to disaggregate this pan-ethnic grouping, right? And then I'd just like to acknowledge my funding for P30, as I mentioned, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yes.
Thanks for the presentation. I have one question. If you look at the cognitive impairment goes all the life, right? And you have sort of 2-year lag on the policy. So I wonder whether you could look at whether by age of migration,
Mm-hmm.
because then you might see longer period, whether it's varies for the behavior, because those individuals
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
close to those policies over a longer period of time, versus individuals who came later in life where their exposure to very close. So have you both?
I have not. I have not considered that as of yet. One of the concerns in moving in this direction, particularly with states and state policy, is the N size, right? It becomes very challenging, right? I think that's a very good idea, and I would definitely explore. But going back to the lag, the 2-year lag, it's something I'm also struggling with a bit, right? Because when we think about policies and the effect of policies, it's different when we think about cognition. Within this grant, I'm also exploring other self-care, the other disability variables in the ACS. And that takes further thought, particularly when you think about some of these policies. Some of them are intuitive, labor policies, domains, for instance. It's like, okay, absolutely, 100%. But you think about others like the LGBT, and they're not as intuitive. And then what happens also, I've presented these preliminary results looking at an overall population 45 to 85. But as I'm immersing myself in this analysis in this new area, as an aging in life scholar, I'm very interested in differences between age groups, and I've done some supplementary analyses looking at groups from 45 to 64 and then 65 to 85, and there's some interesting results, age-related results that are there, but I'm also concerned with some of these models, the wide confidence intervals, right? And it's something that I need to examine further. It's very challenging, particularly, again, over time when we think about these states, where Latinos are, these new destination areas. Now, 2019, before COVID, probably the most reliable data that we have, the distribution was different, right? The distribution of Latinos across the country is different. And when we think about the populations or the states with the highest populations, Texas, New York, Florida, Texas, New York, Florida, where's the other one I'm blinking on right now? California, thank you, the largest one. These populations, the policies have largely remained the same, right? California's liberal, New York's liberal, my home state of Texas is liberal. So this is why, although Jake's data, he examined a whole lot of domains, these were the only domains that showed variation within that time period. Yes.
Would you say that, not as much discussion about path I'm curious about your take about the Puerto Rican population because of the labor mobility that might happen, and maybe that explains some of these results here, where because Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, there's easier ability to migrate from that, and therefore the labor policies don't have much of an implication. Some of the earlier work that you were talking about, saying that the health disparities are larger for people who had come, but maybe it was easier for people, like Puerto Ricans that were established in the U.S. to bring over elderly relatives that needed care. And I don't know if you could say anything about that.
Well, first, with Puerto Ricans, they're U.S. citizens, right? In a lot of my research, I was having a conversation with Emilio earlier this morning at breakfast. I also often get that question. Well, Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. Are they migrating, right? Is it the same flying from Puerto Rico to the USA, New York? Is that the same as flying from Hawaii to Ohio? And no, it's not. There's totally different contexts. And then among Puerto Ricans, there's a lot of racial heterogeneity. A lot of my research has found, and some of it I've shown here, that Puerto Ricans are the most disadvantaged among Latino groups. And that may be in part because phenotypically, Puerto Ricans are Black. Not all of them, but that's part of it, the racialization process, right? And living in areas where they're racialized, right? Emilio?
Yeah, no, very interesting. And have you thought about going back to a place, going back to the state, going back from the policy to the state? Because when you're talking, saying California is liberal, Texas is conservative. So at the end of the day, people think in those terms, thinking not individual policy, but like in the state.
Mm-hmm.
So do these policies organize along states? Some states are always conservative, some states are always some states in between. So is there a way of going back to the state from these findings, or saying for older Latinos it's better to live in California than to live in Texas, or something like that? I don't know if you have thought about it. And the other question that I have is, have you run this for the general population? Are things that are Latinos, are these policies affecting Latinos different from the general population?
So, no to both your answers. But again, this is preliminary work. This grant just got funded a couple of months ago. I'm immersing it, and there's a lot of, as I mentioned, the large 5 states, that's the next step, right? We know that they're liberal, and this is the direction where I'm thinking. Actually, Courtney and I were having a similar conversation right before this. What do we do with these states where they have the large populations, right? Again, New York, California, my home state of Texas, very conservative since, the 80s. Future areas to explore. Yes, I'll come to you next.
So I have a quick question on when you were looking at the different rates for different groups of who had migrated over foreign born, you're looking at different ages from 45 or 50 to 80 plus. How are you incorporating the different mortality rates and return migration into those things?
So as far as return migration, there's nothing, I can't measure that with the data. Right. And the first part of your question, can you repeat that?
It was just how are you also designing?
Oh, mortality selection. Yes, these models don't account for that, but it's we know that mortality selection, particularly among older Latinos, is a factor. So it's something that I'm going to explore in the future. Yes.
And the question is somewhat related to Emilio and Noah's question. When you try to link policies to state policies, how can you integrate the fact that choice of residence is endogenous to these policies, and so whether actually internal migration is responding to these policies and integrated into choices of residence, and potentially make it a little bit more difficult to connect policies with
and it's very challenging. These are, again, obstacles that there's a lot of obstacles that I'm running into. And when you think also about states, states and state residents, migration in between states, right? We know that populations are not static. People move all the time, right? You don't live, for instance, I was born in Texas. In the past 3 years, I lived in 3 different states. Right? What does that mean? How does this data capture or represent, that type of individual? Does that make sense? Yes.
This is very interesting. One thing with which I struggle is actually to understand what is the mechanism through which policies affect developers. Can you tell us, what happens? What are the pathways?
Well, that's one of the things I'm exploring, right? And it depends on policy. It's not a simple question, right? It's not straightforward as, well, this policy runs this mechanism. Again, going back to the LGBT policy domain results, what are the mechanisms? And I'm trying to explore more and more the individual, right, policies to come to a conclusion. You had another question?
Since I don't want to pick that people.
Mm-hmm.
So I get, why did you choose cognitive function over the other disabilities?
So for the purpose of this grant, I'm looking at all disability measures in the ACS. There's 4 self-care and what have you. However, for the purpose of the study, there's a lot of slides. There's a lot of information. Originally, I had planned in presenting also some of my self-care results, right? But we'll be here for a long time. Although I will say in terms of self-care, the patterns that we witness here are largely mirrored in self-care. The other outcomes I haven't looked into or explored in detail.
And are you using the 1-year estimates for all of these?
Mhm.
Or how did you account for, I think it was in the late 2000s that they changed the ability questions?
Yes.
How are you looking at
Thank you. That's a very important question. For the first descriptive results in the first study, I used, once they changed the question moving forward, 2008 forward. For the policy domain, what I did was I created a dummy variable for the changing questions. Again, challenges, right? Challenges in looking at how which is important, how a question is asked. Emilio and I were talking about wordings of questions, particularly for race and ethnicity and what have you, and how those change in the meaning or the interpretation and how the response is given also changes, which could lead to a potential bias. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. I know you had those in the kind of initial stages of exploring these mechanisms and policies, but I wanted you to say anything about your initial reaction to me at least, kind of surprising results for many of the policy mechanisms you shared, and also the negative results.
Yes, I've been thinking through those. Actually, these models I just completed last week, so delving into it's like, all right. It's something I'm exploring, and again, I'm looking at these individuals. Some of these patterns have been significant in other work that Jennifer's published. So, and they're intuitive. And for instance, one policy domain that she's explored that's not intuitive is marijuana laws, right? And why is it significant? How does it affect disability, right? Whether liberal or conservative. And that's just something that needs to explore, and I need to tease out further. Yes. I'm gonna come back to you, Courtney, if you don't mind. Yes, please.
I have a question about have you considered religiosity at all religiosity or religiosity?
No, I have not. There's a large literature exploring religiosity and health among the Latino population, but that is outside my area of expertise. And with this data, I'm not sure in the ACS that they even have a variable for religiosity. Courtney?
Yeah, great. So thanks, Mark. I also have just been thinking a lot as you were talking, and I think my questions relate to Irma and Michelle's points, which one of the strengths of the Grubach data is that you have data going back to the 1970s. So I wondered if you have thought about trying to sort of actually model and create measures that capture sort of long-term stability or change in these policy measures as one idea, given that you might be able to capture some of the both places that have remained relatively stable, which in my just quick read of your talk seem to be the older destinations, places like California and New York, whereas what we might expect is in the more like in the newer destinations, there might in fact be this sort of like white lash response to increased migration, where you see an increasingly conservative shift in a lot of those states.
Sure.
And so, anyways, just trying to think about if there's ways to explore some of that heterogeneity in terms of the actual destinations themselves, the newer versus the older, and how some of those changes have occurred or remained relatively stable over the long time series that you have in the policy.
Yes, and looking at policies, it's something I think is definitely worth exploring. However, specific to the Latino population, this is where the challenges come. How far does the Latino data go back, right? And particularly with the ACS, when we think about disability, those types of things, well, we're limited to, largely 2000 moving forward.
Yeah, and part of it too is that, and also, this all becomes questions, and you're generating really select samples, but if you do have data on when people arrive or the age at which they arrive, you can sort of think about building these longer term policy exposures that aren't requiring, because I agree with you, the challenge is like, how would a 2 year, it's really hard to imagine sort of like a change in criminal legal system policy 2 years ago having an impact on police partnership.
Right.
Temporarily, but if you think about that over a longer course, that might give you a little bit of leverage, especially for immigrants that have been in the United States for a while.
The mechanisms, and you can borrow from some findings, like if you think about cognitive dimension of mental health, so then you can do that, but there's all this research about labor protections actually make people happy, and immigration laws increases stress among the Latinos. So there is, it varies by policy, but it's one of the reasons for why focusing on different policies, because they can have different effects, they can move in different directions. But there's literature connecting that can help you connect the mechanisms.
And one of the things someone had brought up also, if I looked at other racial and ethnic groups, and that's important, right? This is with Latinos, but it's important to see it, to explore how these policies vary by race, right? Among Blacks, among whites, among Asians, and among Latinos.